is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
We're barely bowl eligible here on KC Sports Network. Thank you for tuning in to the very first episode of KC Sports Network's college football podcast. Very happy to be joined by my partner, Maddie Lane, on this one. Last year, we had kind of a passion project with KCSNU Kickoff. That was only on YouTube, so that's kind of a deep cut for KCSN. If you were on the KCSN YouTube page, Maddie and I were previewing the best games of the week, the best prospects that you should keep your eye on. I'm sure we talked about a lot of guys who got drafted this last year on the KCSNU Kickoff show, but this year we are happy to be joined by ESPN draft analyst Matt Miller. Matt, I want to start with you. How you doing, man? Great to have you on the show.
I'm doing well. This means that college football is almost here. And for folks watching on the KCSN YouTube, I'm actually in a hoodie today. It's like 70 degrees and raining this morning, so it's even closer to college football weather. And I always look forward to summer and that post-draft break. But by the middle of July, I'm like, God, I really miss waking up and watching College Game Day and not moving off my couch for 2 days. So I'm ready, guys.
Get me fired up. Maddie, you've got the home field. Is that the home field
it is
TCU shirt? Golly, that's a
You
that's
spoke
a good
about
one.
deep cuts, right? Last year we had our team. We had our team of the KCSNU Kickoff, and it just organically became TCU with all the one-score victories through Big 12 play. So, we had to get the TCU shirt last year for the show. This year, I have a few teams early. We're not going to talk about it yet, but I have a few teams that are early on my those who don't know, I pick a random college team every year that I just find fun in the first month of the year to root for all year. TCU became that last year. We'll see what this year brings. I have a few in my mind, though. We might even talk about one of them today.
Ooh, we're previewing the Big 12 today on today's show. So the way that we've kind of mapped out these shows leading up to week 0, this means we are, I guess, technically 6 weeks away from week 0 because we have a week 0 preview kind of locked in. So that means we are only just over a month away from college football beginning. Incredibly excited. We're going to preview every conference, pretty high-level previews. First up, we're going to start with the Big 12, obviously. A lot of local interest in the Big 12. And they just had their media day recently, which means we've got polls, we've got preseason awards. How much stock you want to put into these polls and preseason awards is up to your discretion. But Texas comes in at number 1 at that the preseason poll, followed by Kansas State, Oklahoma, Texas Tech coming in at number 4, TCU at number 5, Baylor, Oklahoma State, UCF at number 8, Kansas at number 9, an unprecedented number 9. I'm not going to say much more about that. An unprecedented number 9 for Kansas. Iowa State, number 10, BYU 11, Houston 12, Cincinnati 13, and West Virginia 14. So overall thoughts on the preseason poll, Matt. I want to start with you. Anything unexpected that you saw out of that poll coming from the preseason poll?
I have to go full disclaimer here. I've been a Texas fan for like 30 years. So anytime you see Texas at the top, it's just panic and dread sets in, where you're just like, no, don't put these expectations on a Texas team. That means they're going to lose like week 3, week 2 to Alabama. I mean, this is how it always goes. It's a very talented team. Even from what I do from an NFL draft perspective, Texas is talented this year. But I will say, big picture, what surprises me, there's some very well-coached teams that are outside looking in. And I would say Kansas at 9. We saw what they did last year with Leipold being such a great coach. Iowa State always overperforms expectations. They are the anti-Texas. Matt Campbell is such a good coach. They won't finish number 10. When this is all said and done, if we do a recap in December, Iowa State will be higher than 10. And I even think BYU at 11. Like, these are very well-coached teams that do have some talent as well. So I will be surprised if those 3 teams are truly in the bottom of the rankings when it's all said and done.
Yeah, for me, the funny thing about it, I'm glad that you mentioned Iowa State. When Iowa State's predicted to do well, they kind of flatten out back to normal Iowa State. Yes. And when they're not expected to do well, they go out and compete for the Big 12 titles. So I would not be surprised to see them a lot higher because this is the first time in a while I feel like they've been pushed towards this far down the rankings. None of it surprises me a ton. I think Texas deserves, I know you're a little worried because, being a Texas fan, you're a little worried with them at the top. That doesn't surprise me. That makes sense. K-State obviously coming off of winning the Big 12 championship, despite, TCU scoring a touchdown in overtime because he crossed the goal line, but we don't need to talk about that here. So K-State deserves to be second. And the rest of it seems about right. I love this conference. It's one of the most fun to watch right now. And I think we're talking about it soon, but like anybody can win any given week. And like, that's a lot of the fun about the Big 12 right now is there's not a team that you go into any week and be like, oh no, this is definitely a win for that team no matter what. And so that's what makes it so much fun.
Absolutely. Great competition in the Big 12. I got some great players in the Big 12 too. We got the preseason awards coming out there. Maybe a little controversial according to the Twitter folks, but offensive player of the year was Jalen Daniels, a quarterback from Kansas. Defensive player of the year, Jalen Ford from the linebacker from Texas, and newcomer of the year, Treshawn Ward. They all kind of rhyme, actually. Maybe that's why they did it. The newcomer of the year from Kansas State, the running back, the transfer in. So some pretty preseason stuff. I don't know how much you put stock into it. You can put a lot of stock. You can put not a lot of stock. But let's start with the strength of this conference, Matt. What do you kind of think from top to bottom, looking at this conference? How would you describe the strength of it?
I think it's explosive, and there's jokes. The Big 12, they don't play defense. It's somewhat true, but it's going to be an explosive year. And you talk about Jalen Daniels being the Big 12 preseason quarterback of the year, or player of the year. If he's healthy, I mean, we saw last year, my man was on a Heisman track, maybe not to win, but to be in the conversation and to get an invite. If he can stay healthy, I would expect very big things because he was kind of coming into his own last year. The game was starting to slow down. I think we'll see him be, hopefully a little bit bigger this year to where he can absorb some of the punishment that he took last year, especially as such a big play runner. I mentioned my Longhorns. There might not be a better wide receiver room in the country. And I know Ohio State's got some dudes, but Texas has, Xavier Worthy could be a first-round pick. Adonai Mitchell coming over from Georgia. Jordan Whittington comes back as a super senior. This is a loaded offensive group. And then you're going to get offense from Oklahoma. You're going to get offense from Texas Tech. Tech is, if you wanted to say a surprise team, Tech is definitely going to be in the mix because of what they can do offensively. So I expect a ton of points. We should see a lot of 50-55 games, which makes it fun. Mm-hmm. And it truly does leave things open. As you guys know, some of these Big 12 games come down to like who has the ball last because it's just a straight shootout. And that's a little more fun than watching a Big 12 game that's like 9-2, on a Saturday night. So give me all the Big 12.
Yeah, for me, I think it's just kind of the Big 12 is pretty innovative, I think, in all of football, but especially college football. A lot of air raid teams have come through there. You've had a lot of spread offenses, and then you've got the narrative that, this conference doesn't play defense. And while, like Matt said, it's definitely true in some regard, you've also had like teams like Iowa State and K-State kind of being at the forefront of, the 3-3-5 stuff that's taking over the college football, or these 3 safety defenses to slow down that stuff. So there really is super innovative defensive stuff going on scheme wise that plays out on the field to stop these high powered offenses. So it's just kind of fun. If you watch Big 12 football, especially with the connection it has to Texas high school football, because that's, the world of high school football runs through Texas. And that's where a lot of innovation starts. It gets to the Big 12, it seems, before it gets to any other Power 5 conferences. Like that's one of the best parts about the Big 12. Close games. It's competitive, but if you pay enough attention, you're going to see something new that's probably going to catch on the next couple of years. And a lot of times it starts in the Big 12. So like that's something I love to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's a great point. When I think about strength of conference, I kind of think of those, those tier list makers that you can make online and just like put. I think of like I tried to like tier them out. And I think the Big 12 is a solid A tier. Now I don't think it's the S tier. I don't think it's up with there with like SEC and Big 10, depending on what style of football you like to watch, I guess. But it's the strength and like the teams that come out of the Big 12 are always very quality. They've always got one in the mix for the college football playoff too. It seems like they've got some good teams, some good competition. I think it's a solid A when it comes to the tier of what these teams are in. But I do really like this conference, so I think we should talk about the new additions to this conference as well. It's very interesting geographically when you talk about these teams. They're kind of all over the place. But UCF, BYU, Houston, and Cincinnati. Obviously, Oklahoma and Texas are leaving. I believe that's next season for the SEC. These teams get added a year earlier, so that we have a 14-team Big 12 right now. Maddie, I want to start with you. What do you think about these new additions for this conference?
I love it. I understand geography, wise, it doesn't make a lot of sense. There's, you're traveling all over the place, but I think the way college football is heading, that's no longer going to matter that much. And I get it if you are a little bit of a purist, if you are somebody that has always loved, the Big 12 and what that stands for, you probably want it to be a little bit closer. You like the rivalries and everything that it stands for, but as somebody kind of on the outside, I love adding these teams. And I think these kind of group of 5 teams all deserve it. They've all had their own versions of success over the past decade, 2 decades now, with Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, and BYU all coming in now. I think it just adds good competition. You're losing kind of 2 blue bloods of the conference next year. You need to add somebody back into the mix. And I think these 4 schools, while you're not going to replace OU or Texas like 1-to-1 with them, you're adding to what makes the Big 12 great. Every game's exciting. Every game's close and matters. And week in, week out, somebody else can win. So yeah, I like the additions. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm actually most excited to see UCF in a Power 5 team. Like when they play good competition, they usually, show well. How's that look over an entire season? Can they handle the grind of playing against, this higher level of competition all year? But I'm ready for it. I'm ready to see it because that program's fun. They have some of the best jerseys in all of college football as well. So anytime you can just boost those up, I'm all for it.
Matt,
and now UCF can't claim a fake national title. If they go undefeated, they're in a big boy conference, so they can play for a
They should do it again
natty.
anyway.
Right. They still should. I agree. I do. I'm with Maddie. I love you're not going to replace Texas. You're not going to replace Oklahoma. They are close to blue bloods, if not blue bloods in college football. But I think they did a good job of finding intriguing storylines. Houston being elevated, Dana Holgerson's return to the Big 12. There's going to be some bad blood there. And Coach Dana is not only a great time, especially if you get a sugar-free Red Bull into him, but he's an innovative coach, and he's a big personality, a big character that, he and Mike Gundy going at each other is going to be absolutely amazing. But, Houston has had some legit players come through there. Ed Oliver, was a 5-star prospect as a draft pick. They have an offensive tackle this year, Patrick Paul, who looks like he could be a first-round pick, if not a little bit higher. So I do think that they're bringing in programs. BYU, they have Zach Wilson. They have an offensive tackle this year who has an early round 1 grade. So they've done a good job of bringing up schools that are going to continue that pedigree of, high-profile players, getting people drafted. And I'll take a dig at Texas. It's not like the Longhorns have been putting people in the first round a whole lot lately. So I think Houston and BYU have done a better job of that. So, yes, you're losing a big-name school. I do love that we're like 15 minutes in and we really haven't talked about Oklahoma even at this point. So it's like, is losing Oklahoma that big of a deal without Lincoln Riley or Bob Stoops? Maybe not. But, getting these schools in, it's going to be great for the frequent flyer miles, bringing UCF into this. I mean, going from Morgantown, West Virginia to Orlando is just, talk about culture shock for some of these players, but it's definitely going to be a good time.
I can't wait to see the BYU students when they go to Morgantown. That's going to be a culture shock. Talk about going from Provo to Morgantown.
That's like a 6-hour flight. That's
so long. That's so
I know I'm just an old man, but I'm always like, how do they go to class on Friday? Or Thursday? Like, how many classes are you missing when you fly from Provo or Salt Lake City to Morgantown or Orlando? And that's a weekend.
Oh my gosh, that is a very long time. No, I think the additions are very interesting. Cincinnati is one of them too, where that program has been pretty good. It was in the college football playoff, but it kind of been picked over a little bit. You'll say they got a new coach coming in there too. So Houston is an interesting one. I think the BYU as well. And UCF, Matty, you mentioned they've got the coolest uniforms. They've got those uniforms this year that might be a broadcaster's nightmare, as they're all white but have gold numbers on them. Yes. There's no chance anyone's going to be able to see those numbers. I used to spot for stats for Northwest Missouri State, and I would have to call out, the numbers, like catch at this yard line. Northwest had some uniforms that were green and they had silver numbers on them. And then on a sunny college or sunny Saturday, you couldn't really see that. And that's a pretty decent contrast. So I feel for the people having to do the stats, for having to do the calling, the broadcasters, trying to look down and be like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that number is. But no, some great teams, I think, added to this conference. You mentioned Dana Holgerson. A Houston team last year that was incredibly interesting. You never knew what Houston team you're going to get last year. I know there was a couple times Maddie and I were doing shows. We're like, all right, they could win, but they also could just look completely awful. You just had no idea what was going on. Another year with Holgerson is probably
60. I mean, they played a game that ended 63-70 something last year against SMU. That is just one of the wildest things ever. That team was a lot of fun, and that fits exactly with what the Big 12 has. maybe not always going to be the best or cleanest college football that you're going to see, but boy, is it going to be some of the most fun you're going to watch week in and week out.
Yeah. I do think too, like once Dana can recruit for the Big 12, like you're in such a rich area. Like if you can dominate Houston, which I know is hard, Texas A&M's there,
Yeah.
LSU pulls from Houston, obviously Texas pulls from Houston, but man, if he can get a foothold there now that they're in a major conference, like that could be a team that flips its story pretty quick.
Yeah. That's a good team to watch. All right, we got some more topics to talk about. We're going to talk about some dark horse teams, some players to watch. But first, we got to take a break. We got to pay some bills. We'll be right back right after this.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.
Welcome back into Barely Bowl Eligible. I'm hanging out with Maddie Lane and Matt Miller at NFL Draft Scout on the Twitter and the threads too, right? You're on the threads.
Oh, there you go. I'm trying to make it work.
Maddie's on threads as well.
Threads.
Yeah, you are. You might not know
sure?
it, but you are on threads. I don't know. I've kind of given up on threads, truthfully. I forgot about threads till I just mentioned it. But we're talking dark horse teams in the Big 12 right now. And looking up and down like the poll, I think there's just so many that you can like go with, just because as we've been talking about with this conference, it's a pretty deep conference. But Matt, I want to start with you. Who do you think is that dark horse team that could kind of contend to win the conference?
I promise I'm not just sucking up to the local listeners, but I truly think it's the University of Kansas. Like what they did last year. I mean, they gave great teams, good teams, a run for their money. They beat some good teams. I mean, the start to the season last year before Jalen Daniels got hurt was electric. And I did a quick look. I have 15 Kansas players on my preseason draft watch list. Wow. I don't think that's ever happened. I've been doing this since 2011, 2010 professionally. I don't think that's ever happened where I had that many Kansas players. So, that's a credit to the way that they've recruited. It's a credit to the way they've developed players. So if you can keep Jalen Daniels healthy, and that is a big key. You've got Dominic Pooney, offensive guard. He looks like a really, really high-level player as well. So I know K-State's got some dudes per usual, but if I had to pick one Kansas school to kind of be the dark horse to watch, it would be the Jayhawks.
No, I mean, that makes sense. Watching what they did last year, that was a huge step. Let's throw some of the local fans a little bit of a bone here. Who is your favorite Kansas potential draft prospect coming up this year? If you happen to know off your top of your head, just who's your favorite guy on that team right now for the upcoming draft?
Yeah, it is Jalen Daniels, just because the way he plays is where the game's going. But I will say Logan Brown at offensive tackle is pretty close. I'm expecting a big year from him, and he could get himself in that top 100 conversation.
Ooh, very nice. I'm a fan of Mason Fairchild. Talked to some other people too who like him as a tight end. So yeah, he's the guy that I kind of had my eye on last year. I like him too for Kansas. Not a Kansas fan at all. Nobody's going to ever confuse me for that. But I will say some nice things about some of their players from time to time. My dark horse team, it's kind of unfair because they were voted fourth in the preseason poll, but like I still feel like Texas Tech is a team that a lot of people would be surprised if they won the Big 12. Like, I mean, they were voted up highly when it came in the preseason poll, so I get it, but you look at Texas Tech has not had a long history of a ton of success in the Big 12. I mean, they have the best football player on the planet that came through there, and they still weren't winning the Big 12, right? And so I think coming into year two of Joey McGuire and the way that he has that team running, they bring back a lot of production. Yes, they lose Tyree Wilson, who's, was their best player last year. He's gone, but they bring back, I think, almost every other starter on the defensive side of the ball. They brought in a couple guys in the transfer portal. I think this team's going to have a lot of continuity. I think they're going to come out. They're going to be able to hit the ground running. There won't be quite the same level of QB controversy week to week as they had last year, as they rotated through, I think, 3 different starters, and they won't have just everybody trying to get on the same page. So I kind of have high hopes for Texas Tech. I like the way they're going about their process. Like, hey, we're in the Big 12. We're competing with Texas and Oklahoma and all these other bigger programs. Why don't we just dial into the Texas high school pipeline? We have a lot of connections in here. We're just going to recruit locally through these guys, and we're going to make the best. The Texas high school all-star team is essentially what they're making. And I'm excited to see how that plays out for this year. So I got Texas Tech. Yeah, they're voted fourth, but if they end up winning the conference, I'm not shocked.
Same. Also the best draft eligible punter in the nation. Texas Tech.
Oh, that's what we need.
You went deep.
No, that's what we need.
Austin McNamara, best punter in college
Okay.
football. So
writing that one down.
Can't wait for Bill Belichick to sprint to the podium for that one.
Right.
They're going to be doing that. When you talk about like dark horse teams, Matty, you mentioned like Texas Tech is a little bit higher up in the polls. And I was looking back at the poll. I forgot that Oklahoma State got a first place vote. One for single first place vote as the 7th team in the conference. I'm going to go with TCU just because they did lose a lot of guys, right, to the draft. They had a lot of basically their whole offense with Max Duggan and Quentin Johnson and Kendre Miller is gone. But they have the guy, and this might parlay into kind of the next topic we want to talk about in Chandler Morris, who was named the starting quarterback, but then got hurt and was kind of the guy that Sonny Dykes trusted to take over for that offense. I think that there could be a lot there. I think that Sonny Dykes is one of those coaches that he's got a system in place. Feel comfortable with him. Again, picked 5th, so it's not like they're like vastly underrated, but a team that just went to the college football playoff. I think a lot of people were soured by that national championship game, and rightfully so, because it was kind of a bloodbath and not very fun to watch at all. I know a lot of people turned it off before even halftime started, just because it was so one-sided, and that kind of soured some people on like TCU's year last year and just TCU's in general with the style that they play. But I do like TCU a lot. That might be a little bit of a biased pick by me, but I feel like not a lot of people are talking about them, and they did lose a ton on both sides of the ball. Yeah. And I think that's kind of that's a big part that goes into it. But I want to start off with players to watch. I was going to say Chandler Morris as the guy to watch, because I think that's going to be very interesting how he takes over in that quarterback position. And because I mentioned he was tabbed the starting quarterback, and then he got hurt it was BYU, right? That was their first game.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think they start this year against Colorado. So that's going to be a really interesting one.
That's right.
I think that is actually Deion's first game at Colorado is against TCU. Ooh. That's going to be a very fun game to watch. Cannot wait to preview that game. But that's who I've got for my player to watch this season. Maddie, let's start with you. Who do you got?
Oh, well, I'm glad that you mentioned Oklahoma State, because I think they're undergoing a little bit of a change here. That team has been Steven Sanders' team for, it feels like a decade now. He feels like he's been there forever. And that was kind of how you defined Oklahoma State. He's gone now. There's a lot of stuff going on there. There's a lot of change, a lot of guys in, out. I'm not entirely sure. We have some people that are Oklahoma State fans that were really disappointed for how the season was going. Now they're a little bit hyped up again. So I don't know, but Colin Oliver, he's coming in. He's a defensive end for him. He took a step back in his production for them last year. I believe he was the Big 12 freshman, player of the year as a freshman 2 years ago. Last year took a small step backwards, but now he's kind of transitioning to a off-ball linebacker, edge, kind of outside linebacker type player. I think that's good for him. I think he's a little bit lighter, but he's a great speed rusher. I want to see what he has. He's undersized, like in terms of a draft prospect, but for a college edge rusher, he's a guy that has a lot of speed. I think he's pretty flexible, and I think they're going to find a way to weaponize him a little bit more this year. So I would like to see him to get back up and kind of compete for, that Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year kind of moniker again that I think a lot of people had hopes that he would do last year.
Yeah, that's a good one, Maddie. I'm gonna stick true to my Longhorns and not talk about the wide receivers, but talk about the tight end, Jatavian Sanders, who is
so good.
For all the hype last year. It was like, oh my gosh, Xavier Worthy and all these receivers going to break out. It was Jatavian Sanders who broke out. 6'4", 250, big target. They can play in line. They flexed him out. They've played him in some H-back, but he had a very quiet 54 catches last year and was oftentimes a clutch weapon. When the vertical routes weren't working with Worthy and the other guys, it was Sanders, who was making the plays underneath. And I think now we have a healthy Quinn Ewers, year 2 in the system, where he's not coming straight off Ohio State, 19 years old, being thrown into the mix as, oh, hey, go save Texas football. The mullet's gone. He's bulked up a little bit. So I think the Texas offense should be more in sync, and Sanders is the guy who could really benefit. So I've even done it. There will be a ton of talk about that wide receiver room. What do you do without Bijan Robinson? What do you do without Roschon Johnson? They're going to throw the ball a lot more this year. And I really do think Sanders is the guy who could benefit the most. Brock Bowers at Georgia is the best tight end in the country, bar none. But Sanders is quietly right there in the mix as somebody who could be, like a late first-round pick, early second-round pick. We'll see how he looks when it comes to the combine and things like that. He's only a junior, so he has some time. But he is someone that, say, every time I watch games on Saturday, I'm continually impressed with what he's doing. So this could be the year he becomes more of a household name.
That entire Texas team, I mean, is full of players to watch. We only talked about, a couple guys here, and we don't want to talk only about Texas, but the team's so good. You mentioned all the wide receivers, and they have was it Nair, the transfer from Wyoming, that had to miss all last year?
He looked amazing in summer, and even the spring game, and had to miss the season. Yeah.
Oh, it's like there's so much talent on that team, and this kind of goes back to the point. They're first overall in the preseason poll. They should win. This is a team on talent, and you can say this most years, but I think you've also seen the strides to think that this team should be competing for the playoff this year. This team should be competing against anybody they play. One of my favorite players for Texas, and he's not like a draft eligible guy, but the left tackle, Kelvin Banks. I love watching him. Him getting out in space is one of my favorite guys to watch right now. I loved watching him getting out for Bijan or Roshan last year. It's like the Texas Longhorns. I teased it at the top. There's a team that's on my contention list for being kind of my team of the year. Texas is the one. They're a big.
Come on over, Maddie. I'll send you
I love all the
t-shirts, man.
I love all the talent there, man. They're on the list. There's a couple other teams, but they are early on the list because I love Ewers. I think he's got a lot of talent, and I think some people have soured on him because they saw the ups and downs last year, but I think there's a chance that he's really good. I love a lot of the other players. Like, I'm excited to see Texas this year. I really am.
Kelvin Banks not voted first team all Big 12 preseason. And yes, that's a big oversight, but I just hope it pisses him off, puts a little chip on his shoulder, and he just steamrolls people all year as a reminder. So Kelvin, print it out, put it in your locker, buddy.
There you go. Matt, you mentioned it kind of earlier on in the show. It took us a long time to mention Oklahoma. We still haven't really talked about Oklahoma all that much.
We should probably do that.
I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that.
And I know I already said Jalen Morris, but Dylan Gabriel's a very interesting case too. When you talk about Oklahoma and how he's going to be, he was beat up last year, right? That Oklahoma team was not up to Oklahoma standards, and it was a very weird year, I think, for Oklahoma. What Dylan Gabriel does is going to be very interesting, I think, this year. And Maddie and I have had the conversations about just like quarterbacks in this conference. There's a lot of pretty solid quarterbacks in this conference. When you talk about Will Howard, you talk about Quinn Ewers, you talk about Dylan Gabriel, Jalen Daniels. You can convince me on the order of those four guys. Usually it's pretty kind of up in the air until we get into kind of the play. But like a healthy Dylan Gabriel, especially when he was at UCF, was exciting to watch, a fun player to watch. They do lose Theo Weese, transferred to Missouri, but I mean, he didn't get used a whole lot at Oklahoma. So I just had to throw Theo Weese out there and give Mizzou a shout out. And just going to try to see how many Mizzou shouts I can do on each show without it.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.
No, it's a very interesting conference, and that kind of brings us to our wrap-up question here. Who do we think will win the conference? What's our conference winner prediction? I think we all might have the same answer, but Matt, I do want to start with you on this one. Who do you got winning the conference? Biases aside.
Bias aside, and the existential dread that comes over me when I have to make this prediction, but I'm going to say Texas. If Texas does not win the conference, they will be looking for a new head coach. There's my bold take for you, because the expectations are college football playoffs this year. I think realistically, even if you chalk up a loss to Alabama early in the season, they should, on talent, they should beat Alabama. They're that talented. That's not a homer pick. I would not have said that last year, and they almost beat Alabama. So I think this is a year where, yes, the schedule's tough. And yes, you have a target on your back every week because every player in the Big 12 didn't get recruited by you. And there's always going to be that target when you're Texas of, we've even heard Patrick Mahomes say it. He loved playing Texas because he didn't go there and they didn't give him that look. And so there's a target, but I think right now Texas has the scheme with Sark, and they finally have the players to run his scheme. And that was a really important transition point once he got in there. Was the scheme was great, but now you got to get the players. He's got his players, so there's no more excuses. Texas should win this conference.
I'm with you. I can't really make a good argument against it. I love Sark. I think he's a lot of fun. I think he's a really good offensive mind, and you give him this much talent. Eventually, you have to start seeing the results. And I think you've seen flashes of the results, especially last year. They were there. There was just still a little bit of a consistency issue, and you kind of got to hope you shake that out this year. So I'm also going to pick Texas. I think they should win. If they don't, I do think there is some trouble kind of brewing there. Kansas State every year is always going to be there because what Kansas State's going to do is they're going to make something ugly. It's every game's going to be ugly. The season's going to probably be kind of a grind, but they find ways to win football games. And if you get to that Texas K-State football matchup, I believe, is that kind of that's towards the end of the year, isn't it? Or is it in the middle?
Yeah, it's in November. Yeah.
Okay. So it's there at the end. That might be the game for the whole thing right there. That might be your final kind of thing to figure out, I guess, who's going to get into the final match, the championship game there. But like, that's a big game coming in. They might play each other twice in, I guess, that month almost. So it'll be interesting, but I got Texas. Taking this. I think the only game they should lose on talent is Alabama. You want to chalk up another loss in there to like a K-State or cover your ears, Matt, Oklahoma, because the talent might be close enough there. One more loss to get them to the championship game, maybe, but they should win the conference or at least be playing in the championship game.
Yeah. I think the path looks the best for Texas, right? You talk about that's who I'm taking as well as Texas, but you talk about Kansas State. They lost a whole lot on the offensive side of the ball. When you talk about kind of where they're going to be at, Will Howard does return after the 6 games that he played. I don't know if he played their 6 toughest games. When I went back and looked at their schedule, kind of looking at it, I might have played their 6 easiest games. He played TCU twice. He got the best of them one time, but as Maddie mentioned, did he really though? It's a conspiracy theory. But anyway, I do think that Texas it's their conference to lose, and they are talented. You mentioned the last year's Alabama game, a healthy Quinn Ewers, and I think they do beat Alabama. And
I think at that game, sweating my, body off. And as a Texas fan, I was like, I think I bet like $100 on Texas to win just to dick around. Yeah. And that was a large payout. And as it got late in the game, I'm looking at my wife and my brother, and I'm like, not only might Texas win, but I might win a lot of money, on this game. Obviously, Texas did not win, and I stopped betting last year, like week 2, because I was so disillusioned by what happened. And but that's a bittersweet game to talk about.
That's a game that I would probably stay away from. Well, I don't know what that line is right now, but like that game is like, I don't know if I'll touch that one.
Yeah, I shouldn't have. Yeah.
Oh well, but. All right, before we get out of here, there's a few teams we haven't mentioned yet. Maddie, I want to start with you. Just some final thoughts on this conference. Anything that we didn't hit on that you wanna touch on?
I mean, we kind of skirted around it, but Oklahoma is there. Oklahoma has been, kind of the class of the Big 12. Obviously, losing Lincoln Riley, matters in this equation here. But they had been winning. They had been right there at the top, and now they're going to enter year 2 under Brent Venables. Can Oklahoma transition to a defensive first team? Like, can they do that? It's hard for me. I know they've been there before, like kind of, but it's like hard for me to envision that, right? So like, I'm just curious to see what they do, and not even what this team looks like. They're moving to the SEC. It's only going to get harder for them. I wonder what the kind of that identity of that team is going to be. And if they have another rough year, injuries aside, like I just wonder how much longer Brent Venables is going to be in that job. Like, I know he was passed over or turned down some head coaching jobs while he was a defensive coordinator at Clemson. I know there is some stuff in his background that maybe didn't make him super appealing for every school. So like, if you start to have that and then struggles, I understand the history there with Oklahoma for him, but that's not a team worth or like used to losing very often. So another bad year, he might find himself quickly on the hot seat as well.
Yeah, especially a bad year without a direction, without a clear direction.
Yeah.
If you can't say like, hey, like, we won 6 games, 7 games, but here's where we're going. You could almost sell that, but I'm with you, and I'm not saying that as a Texas fan. You would love for Oklahoma to like stick with a coach that can't figure it out, but I don't think they're going to do that. It is interesting. Some of the teams that don't get mentioned, Baylor. We didn't talk about Baylor one time. That's always an interesting team. They're kind of middle of the pack right now, but we've seen in the past like they do a very good job of they will recruit speed. And they will recruit guys who've been overlooked and kind of have that chip on their shoulder, and then they're going to win like 9 games. So you definitely have to keep an eye on Baylor. They don't have the big names this year. They don't have the star power. One crazy like NFL draft take I'll have for you guys. The Big 12 is so deep on offensive line this year. Cooper Beebe, obviously at Kansas State. I mentioned Patrick Paul at Houston. There's Kingsley, the left tackle at BYU, but this is a really, really good year for offensive line play in the Big 12. Texas has some dudes. Oklahoma has some guys. So if you're just sitting back on a Saturday and you're thinking, whether it's as a Chiefs fan or something else, about, filling needs in the draft, the Big 12 is a really, really good conference for offensive line play this year.
Yeah. It's exciting to watch. You mentioned Cooper Beebe. I kind of want to hit on Kansas State a little bit more. I did mention that they were kind of bludgeoned from the NFL draft, basically at the talent that they have on the offensive side of the ball, defensively too. When you talk about their corners, but they've got a lot of guys stepping up there. Again, I think it's a testament to kind of Chris Kleiman and what they got going on that they're second after losing all those key guys that they have. They do return their quarterback, which is a really big key piece. But a team that is going to be competing for that Big 12 title. And listen, it wouldn't shock me if they do win the Big 12 again. I think that they're one of those teams that, as I can't remember if Matt or Maddie mentioned it, they're just they're ugly, and it's one of those things that they win ugly, they win the games, they figure out a way to do it, and that's what you kind of need to do in the Big 12 is figure out how to win ugly ways. And that could be a negative connotation. Some people can take that how they want, but that's a very positive thing, I think, for Kansas State and kind of how they approach these games. And Chris Kleiman and Colin Klein too, as an offensive coordinator, I know he was kind of he was almost lured away by the Notre Dame job, but stayed put in Manhattan. So very exciting times in Manhattan, Kansas for football, for basketball. But that team to lose as much as they did and be number 2 still, I think it speaks highly of the coaching staff there.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, it's a great coaching staff. Do we think K-State has the best coaching staff in the Big 12? Like, who do you guys think has the best coaching staff in the Big 12? Any answer's fine. You know, I think there's a few teams right there.
Yeah.
K-State,
a lot of good coaches.
Total staff, it might be K-State.
Yeah.
It's crazy that 5 years ago you would have said like Matty Campbell at Iowa State. The NFL wants him, but you know they've underperformed. Even though he's legitimately like turning out talent to the NFL, they've underperformed. So, man, that is a good question.
Yeah, I think Matt Campbell at Iowa State, he kind of hit the ceiling and the hype got really built up. And then, like, it's so hard to sustain what he did at Iowa State for too long.
Yep.
And maybe he wants to be at a school like that or something, but just kind of feels like it stalled out a little bit. And now, not that he's not a great coach, I mean, he's still a phenomenal coach. What he's doing at Iowa State is unprecedented there, but it feels like that hype has stalled out. But yeah, I'd lean K-State. You mentioned Baylor earlier. Not that I think their staff overall goes up there, but I do love Dave Aranda. And I think that kind of wraps up into the innovation part of the Big 12 stuff that he does defensively and how many new coaches and stuff base a lot of what they do around what he learned through Wisconsin and took to LSU with them. It's like, I always do love watching Baylor just for his defense, honestly, and all his clinics. His clinics are the best.
Yeah. Lots of good coaches when you just talk about head coaches in the Big 12. Lots of good ones to talk about. And it's in a very exciting conference. So we thank you guys for listening to our Big 12 preview of Barely Bowl Eligible, the new college football show here on KC Sports Network. For Matt Lane and Matt Miller, I'm Tucker Franklin. We'll be back next week with another conference preview. We'll see you then.